Hi everyone, it's me, Anne. Welcome to Operation Rise. In all the rest of the videos, it's my voice talking, but this is actually the last video I'm making because I kept on forgetting to make this one. So I'm having some trouble pulling it together at this point, so I'm going to have a virtual voice do it. See you later, bye.
The last time I posted was in November 2022. I was going through an exceptionally difficult season health-wise and was facing some appalling personal upheaval, which I'll get into later, but suffice it to say it was a very heavy and discouraging time. After I hit rock bottom, I felt hope rising in me, and I insisted on going on the record about it for no other reason than that I am a follower of Christ and I have tied my future to him. And then I dropped off the face of the earth. This is what happened since then. My parents, in the midst of my health upheaval, told me, "We're moving south." My brothers and sisters came in to move us out of the ginormous house we had lived in for 35 years. At that point, we were only living in a third of the home because my daddy had gotten sick. Moving made sense. It was just a really hard decision which loving sibling to move to. But we were so grateful to have the choice to move at all, and they made it happen. But it was a Herculean task physically and emotionally. Emotionally, I was devastated to be taken out of the life I had loved again. To review, I grew up in the DC area. I got my MBA from Georgetown after my dad told me to go back to school and get some real skills, and then I moved to Oregon in 2009 for a finance job in corporate America. Right at that moment, when I struck out on my own and was finally gainfully employed, I felt that God was calling me to serve in Burundi, Africa. They needed a financial person who was also a strong Christ follower, and after a period of study and preparation I visited Burundi and was invited to move back permanently. I was beyond excited. The princess and the pea were moving to Africa for real. But 4 days before I had my final meeting with my Oregon church to ask to be formally sent to Burundi, at which point I would quit my job, something exploded in my head and left me for dead. I know that sounds melodramatic, but that's what happened. I had an AVM rupture that triggered a massive stroke. I was at work, and a bunch of tangled blood vessels near my cerebellum exploded, and I collapsed. The local hospital was unable to treat me, but they transferred me downtown, and my surgeon later told my parents I was half dead by the time I got to his table. But he saved my life, and I did 2.5 months of inpatient at 3 different hospitals before I was discharged in a wheelchair, and my parents took me home to Maryland to begin the adventure of outpatient recovery. And then I embarked on a period of astonishing gains for many years, and I wrote and spoke about survivorship and recovery while training my little heart out. But by the time COVID hit, I had started declining. Physically, I was not doing great. Point one concern was that I had started losing hearing in 2019 and had become fully deaf in the left in 18 months. I fully expected to lose the right at the same pace and was concerned that being newly deaf as an adult would really hinder me from making friends in the South. Spoiler alert, my right ear is relatively stable. The hearing was the tip of the iceberg health-wise. They found a little bit of lung damage they think was probably from the vent in 2011, but it not significant enough to be driving the amount of discomfort I was having. So my PCP and my neurologist guided me through 2 rounds of testing of my lungs, heart, and brain. And here are some pics. The big stop sign is what I put on my door during my sleep study. All these tests yielded no real answers. I just continued to decline and get frustrated after having so many years of being able to build my health and mobility. I was facing all new and changing parameters. Among other things, I was informed I needed an elevator. My dysautonomia really kicked in. I started having trouble swallowing food, and my breathing and heart rate felt quite awful. During our last year at home, I started to just lie on the floor, wherever I was to let my systems catch up. When we moved south, I was tasked with introducing myself to a brand new community and requesting a 3rd round of lungs, heart, and brain testing. I had a lot of explaining to do. I used to bring a 1-page PowerPoint with me. By the time I got to the foremost authority on these matters in my new city, I put a statement at the top in a red box. My inner systems are no longer supporting my ADLs. This is a huge statement from someone who just received pulmonary and cardiac clearance after rigorous testing. My doc looked at my 1-pager full of red flags, looked me in the eye, and said what I already knew, but did not want to admit. None of your symptoms require an additional diagnosis. Everything is attributable to the severity of your original injury. So to be clear, I do not have a neurodegenerative disease. I do have TBI with progression. I had refused to believe my brain injury was progressing because I had enjoyed so many years of building strength and my MRI had stayed the same. But upon reflection, my MRI had looked pretty rough to begin with. And while I was going through this last round of medical adventures, my precious father was declining. He did not live a full year upon our move south. He passed away in November 2023, and I miss him so much. A month later, I ate my last meal at Christmas. I had gradually been eating less and less, and then I stopped tolerating solid protein entirely. So I consulted my PCP and Smurfette, my registered dietitian, Trainer David's lovely wife, and adjusted my relationship with food. In spring 2025, I started experiencing significant cognitive changes. The Lord had led me to anticipate this possibility, and I had been starting to offload and pare down my activities since 2021. But this was the first time I told my doctors about it. They did not bat an eye. They listened as I described how tired I was and how I was recognizing behavioral and cognitive signs of brain injury in myself not present before, and they gently suggested I try a stimulant. I made a huge fuss, actually picked a fight with my PCP, and drew it out until 6 months later. I got so desperate, I took the plunge. And then, Mommy, my favorite person in the world, had a stroke in February 2026. And I'm now on my 4th stimulant because I maxed out the usefulness of the first 3. After a grueling inpatient stint, Mommy is at home with me and Boo Boo and our family, and we are so grateful to be together, but it's also one of the hardest things I've had to grapple with. It's not the hardest thing because all of these really difficult changes and losses were taking place against the backdrop of major trauma. I refer to it euphemistically as Operation Starfish. This had started brewing in 2018-2019, but I did not disclose until January 2021. I had blocked this out for so many years. I just had an oppressive cloud following me around, and I slept with one eye open for a decade. But the brain has ways of protecting you from knowledge and memories that are too much. And the Lord shielded me from this information about myself until He had put every resource in place for my healing. The first sign that something was going on with me was that I became aggressive when lying on the treatment table. I was horrified that my body was doing things I could not control and was not consciously choosing. To review again, my last post was on how hope is rising, and then my world got set on fire. We moved after I had disclosed Operation Starfish and was at the height of my level of distress, and my mental health professionals, who had thought we had enough to be getting on with just the medical trauma, had started the real high-octane trauma treatment. I was like, seriously? After 10 years, I have to deal with Operation Starfish? What a plot twist. And yet it made everything make sense. Now I knew why I had slept with one eye open for a decade, why I watched my own back, and why I'd fight anyone at the drop of a hat. I felt awful. Trauma like Operation Starfish will not just break you, it will erase you. Or make you try to erase yourself. And then came plot twist 2. I decided I'm going to fight for this. To be clear, for years I denied vehemently that anything bad had ever happened to me. But for the record, everything I said or wrote in that decade was me telling the truth as I knew it at that moment. But now, as in my physical life, I was dealing with all new parameters, and I felt completely obliterated. I had actually completely negated a part of myself to survive. And I knew that this was not the abundant life the Lord had promised me. So when I decided to fight, I meant that I was going to contend for my own faith. I had already decided that Jesus Christ is the person He says He is on Decision Day back in 2011, but now in light of this really horrible thing I had to decide if I could still trust Him. So I did what I know how to do. I followed the paper trail and mapped it out. And this series of vids is the outcome. Welcome to Operation Rise. Those are my hands holding the lights. I took that pic soon after I disclosed in faith that one day I'd use it publicly when talking about Operation Starfish. But it took 5 years of searching and healing to get to that point. Operation Rise actually originated with a question I got from a precious friend. And then it morphed into a series of videos I'm going to publish weekly until the end of the year. The first thing we have to do is define rise. We are not talking about rising above your circumstances or strategies for self-actualization and optimizing discipline in your life. We are talking about becoming the person God meant you to be, and this starts with your own decision day. And if you decide yes, then at that point God sees you as already risen in Christ, and you're adopted into the family of God. Then you learn how to live like it. God meant you to rise to be like Christ. Christ Himself said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." John 14 verse 6. Everything hinges on the resurrection. And it's only through Christ that you gain access to the power that makes a pile of nothingness into something strong and beautiful, that takes something stone cold dead and brings it to thriving, flourishing life. Of course, I'm dealing with some really high-octane stuff here, but I have to warm up to it. So this series serves concerns ranging from 1. The daily grind is exhausting. 2. Life is really hard right now because something difficult happened. 3. How do I reconcile the facts that God is sovereign and something horrible happened to me? This is a series of 26 vids I'll publish weekly through December. It was going to be 52 vids, but the cognitive changes kept on going, and I only got to 26. I'm happy with the series, though, and I invite you to come along for the ride.